I am truly sorry that the younger sister of the groom, Emma, is connected to such an outstanding family like us. To put it bluntly, someone like Emma, who only graduated from middle school, is nothing but a disgrace to the family. In my opinion, she should stay away from family gatherings and be mindful of her social status when interacting with us. The bride's father, his face turning bright red, delivered an astonishing statement with an unpleasant grin during the family representative speech. Speaking loudly, my father, mother, and even myself were taken completely off guard by those words. We never expected such a thing to be said in front of everyone at the wedding reception, and we found ourselves speechless with our mouths wide open. Suddenly the groom, Nate, who had abruptly risen from his seat, approached the bride's father with a gentle smile on his face. However, from our family's perspective, his expression clearly showed anger. And when my brother, who had come up to the bride's father, raised his arm, I hurriedly stood up to intervene. My name is Emma Brown. I work at a locally renowned construction company. I initially found it challenging to adapt to the predominantly male environment, but now I have become well acquainted with it and have developed good working relationships with the carpenters at this construction company. The foreman is still a strict and intimidating person, but I never disliked him because he shows his passion to pass on the skills he possesses to younger individuals. After everyone had left the construction site, I took a deep breath and loosened my body, all the while contemplating such matters. I then silently began drawing the blueprints necessary for the next task. I finally finished drawing the blueprints, and it was already evening. By the time I completed them, it was only then that I realized I had been working tirelessly without a break since lunch, and my stomach growled loudly. After reviewing the completed blueprints once more and nodding in approval, I began tidying up as I prepared to head back to the apartment provided by the construction company. I noticed that there were sandwiches placed on the desk and the rest area intended for takeaway. Next to them, there was a note with the foreman's neatly written message, "Make sure to have a proper meal." It made me happy and I couldn't help but smile. I gratefully accepted the sandwiches from the foreman and after securing the premises, returned to the apartment. Suddenly, my smartphone rang, thinking it might be someone else. I looked at the screen and to my surprise, my brother's name, with whom I hadn't had a conversation for years, was displayed. Unlike me, my brother has always been exceptionally talented from a young age. Although he was a bit laid back at times, he became even more dedicated to his studies, graduating from medical school, and now working as a surgeon at the largest and most advanced university-affiliated hospital in our hometown. Upon receiving a call from my highly respected brother, I placed the sandwiches on the desk and took a deep breath before answering. When I heard my brother's voice saying, "I'm glad you picked up," I couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. I asked in a trembling voice, "What's going on?" All of a sudden in response, my brother with a somewhat embarrassed tone explained his reason for calling. "Well, actually, I've decided to marry my current partner. I know you might be busy, but I really want you to come to the wedding. We haven't seen each other in so many years, and I've been thinking about it. It seemed like a good opportunity. What do you think?" In a slightly nervous tone, my brother spoke and I replied, "Of course." He then smiled with great joy, warming my heart. After briefly updating each other on our recent lives, we reluctantly hung up the phone, suppressing the feeling of nostalgia. I don't know much about the person he is in a relationship with, but I assume he has already met our parents and I can probably have a conversation with them about it before the wedding day. As I idly pondered these thoughts, I couldn't help but feel happy, and I decided to warm up the sandwiches the foreman had given me in the microwave and enjoyed my meal. The sandwiches that day seemed to taste even better than usual. A while later, I received the wedding invitation from my brother, and once the wedding date was confirmed, I talked to the foreman about taking some time off. After a brief pause, he gave me his consent. Relieved by his response, he chuckled and mentioned that there was a condition. It seemed that there was a request for me to take on the role of a guest lecturer for just 3 days at a specialized construction school run by an acquaintance. He asked me to consider accepting this teaching role. Presumably, that person had requested the foreman to be the guest lecturer, and I was in a dilemma about my ability to handle the task. The foreman chuckled and said, "I'm telling you that you can do it, so go with confidence." His words gave me determination, and I nodded firmly. As promised, I arrived at the address provided by the foreman on the designated day, and at the specified time, I found myself in front of a beautiful building. And to my surprise, the entire building was the campus of this specialized construction school. I couldn't help but look up in awe. I entered the building nervously and spoke to the receptionist. They directed me to a preparation room that had been set up for the guest lecturers. There I was reviewing the content of my lecture when there was a knock on the door and a man entered the room. I greeted the man with a puzzled expression by saying, "I'm Emma from the construction company." He stared at me as if assessing me, then let out a deep sigh. I see. Even though it's a prestigious, specialized school, he couldn't easily share his skills. We talked about preserving tradition and yet can't believe he's letting a woman in. Well, please do your best this time. I believe there are limited things women can do in this field. Frustrated by his words and his intense stare, I stared back at the man and spoke up. Gender doesn't matter in any industry. Good work is achieved when individual personalities come together. Making dismissive comments about women while working in a specialized construction school is unacceptable. That's why this world doesn't change. Please don't give rigid prejudices to the young people who are about to enter the world of architecture. Also, I won't just do it casually for 3 days. I promise to make those 3 days meaningful for the students. Having heard my words, the man let out a frustrated sigh as if he couldn't stand women who get cocky just because they manage to survive in a male-dominated world. He then turned his back and walked away. I glared at the man's retreating figure, determined that I would deliver a lecture that would undoubtedly make the students look forward to the next one. With a burning passion in my heart, I took my first step into the classroom for the lecture, and so I successfully completed my 3-day stint as a guest lecturer, leaving the specialized school with fond farewells from the students I had become close to. I decided to provide a report, so I returned to the construction company and informed the foreman about the content of the lectures I had delivered during these 3 days. I also mentioned the disrespectful remarks made by the person in charge on the first day after listening to my story. The foreman took a moment to think and then simply said, "I see, it must have been tough." But there were no specific criticisms, which made me happy. So I returned to my apartment, skipping with joy. And then came the long-awaited day of my brother's wedding. According to my parents, who had gathered at a hotel near the wedding venue the day before, my brother's fiancée was named Amy White. She worked as a nurse at the same hospital as my brother and was not only responsible for taking care of hospitalized patients, but also highly skilled in assisting doctors in the operating room. As I recalled that conversation and made my way to the dressing room at the venue, I found the dress that my mother had prepared for today. When I saw it, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Although I was a bit bewildered by the fluttery dress, which was something I had never worn before, my skilled mother quickly took charge of my makeup and hair styling. In no time, I found myself unable to look in the mirror, feeling too embarrassed to lift my face after cooling my flushed cheeks. Hearing compliments from my parents about how cute I looked, I made my way to the family waiting room. However, my attention was captivated by a particular man who was there. That man was undoubtedly the person in charge of the specialized school who had ridiculed me on that day with a friendly smile. This man named Kenny White approached us, and it became apparent that he was Amy's father. I did my best to conceal my discomfort and kept it from showing on my face. Though I was taken aback by the unexpected reunion, I thought that we would probably only have to deal with each other today and wouldn't have any reason to speak in the future. Remembering the words from that day, I suppressed my irritation and proceeded to greet him after my parents. However, he either didn't realize it due to my dressed-up appearance or chose to ignore it, and he commented, "You look like a lovely young lady." This remark only increased my irritation. I had mostly been in a position of listening to my parents' conversation and avoiding unnecessary interjections. However, perhaps he felt considerate and thought of including me in the conversation. As Kenny asked Emma, "Where did you graduate from university?" Unable to ignore him and with a forced smile, I replied, "I graduated from middle school and started working for personal reasons." For a brief moment, Kenny's smiling face turned slightly distorted and I felt like he gave me a cold stare. Observing Kenny's expression with a furrowed brow, trying not to be noticed, I saw him quickly return to a smile and say, "I see. That's interesting," before changing the subject. Although I had a strange sense of unease due to that brief change in expression, my brother and Amy's wedding ceremony began. Amy was even more beautiful than I had imagined, and the pure white wedding dress suited her perfectly. My brother, dressed in a matching all-white tuxedo, also looked incredibly dashing. Seeing them together made me smile warmly as the wedding ceremony ended and we transitioned to the reception. My father suddenly began to look flustered. I asked him what was wrong, and it turned out that my brother had asked him to deliver the family's representative speech. He was wiping sweat from his brow and checking his notes as I exchanged glances with my mother and shared a wry smile. The speech from the bride's family representative began before my father's turn. Kenny seemed to be in high spirits, perhaps due to seeing his daughter in her bridal attire. He had consumed quite a bit of alcohol and had a flushed face. He appeared a bit unsteady as he was supported by the bride's mother. Eventually, he stood up and made his way to the microphone that had been prepared for him. Still, as I watched Kenny confidently standing in front of the microphone despite being somewhat drunk, I couldn't help but chuckle, thinking that he had a different air of authority compared to my father. Then, with the microphone in hand, Kenny bowed and began to speak with a smirk on his face. "Thank you very much for gathering here today to celebrate my daughter's wedding. Normally I would like to offer words of congratulations as well, but I want all of you to know my true feelings. I'm truly sorry that the younger sister of the groom, Emma, is connected to such an outstanding family like us. To put it bluntly, someone like Emma, who only graduated from middle school, is nothing but a disgrace to the family. In my opinion, she should stay away from family gatherings and be mindful of her social status when interacting with us." The suddenness of his words left me, my father, and my mother utterly speechless. However, in the corner of my mind, Kenny's earlier expression came to mind, and I now felt like I understood the reason behind it. A sense of frustration slowly welled up within me. Then my brother, who stood up abruptly, approached Kenny with a calm smile. However, it was evident from his expression that he was clearly upset, a sentiment that was apparent to our family. As I saw my brother approaching Kenny and raising his arm, I stood up to intervene and stop my brother. However, my brother maintained a fixed smile and only took the microphone from Kenny. Seeing this, I halted my movement and my brother began speaking to Kenny. "I believe that a person who values connections with people just like you shouldn't be unaware. But just to confirm, do you know my sister's profession properly?" However, Kenny, not understanding the meaning of the question, mumbled her and froze in place. Seeing his reaction, my brother continued with his words. "Don't you know you personally requested her as a lecturer at the specialized school, and you enjoy visiting old architectural structures like churches, right? Emma is a master carpenter involved in their restoration." Upon hearing my brother's words, Kenny started trembling and suddenly shouted angrily at my brother. "What is a woman as a master carpenter? Don't play dumb. Listen here. Being a master carpenter is a specialized and beautiful skill within the world of construction. There's no way a woman could handle such a role." As Kenny continued to make a scene, seemingly forgetting that there were other guests at the reception, my brother maintained his smile and spoke once more. "What are you saying? Emma is a genuine master carpenter who trained under the human national treasure, Mr. Herbert Smith. Are you really suggesting that she can't handle it just because she's a woman? Since you are the one who reached out to him in the first place, why don't you hear him out?" When my brother gestured towards someone, I looked in that direction and noticed the master carpenter sitting quietly in a less conspicuous corner. I was left speechless in astonishment. The foreman, who had been silent up to that point, grinned when he made eye contact with my brother, and shot a piercing stare at Kenny. "You're in a position to guide the young folks who will shape the future of the construction industry, yet you harbor such twisted prejudices." "Kenny, I had heard about what was said when our Emma went to teach at your school, but this is on a whole other level. Listen up. Whether it's a woman or a man doesn't matter. It's about leveraging each person's strengths to cooperate and become the best we can be. If you keep going on about how it's a man's world, you'll be left behind by the times. And by the way, I'm pretty sure I made myself clear during the discussion about the teaching assignment. I said the best apprentice for this task is available. You think I'm underestimating things. If anything, from where I stand, you're the one underestimating us." Intimidated by the thunderous voice that echoed through the venue and the piercing gaze, Kenny's confidence seemed to evaporate. He turned as pale as a sheet and muttered, "I'm sorry," before returning to his seat in a daze. The venue remained agitated for a while, but then Amy stood up and with a composed voice said, "I apologize for the interruption. Let's take a short break and then resume." Then, with a pale face, just like the stunned Kenny, I glared at his wife, who was frantically calling out to him, and she, as if influenced by that gaze, slowly led Kenny out of the venue. When the reception resumed, Amy's parents were no longer present, but she had a refreshed expression which gradually lifted the atmosphere in the venue, and in the end we were able to close it with smiles afterward. As the foreman was about to leave the venue, I stopped him and asked about the situation. He explained that despite being asked several times and having a brief conversation, Kenny had knelt and requested him to attend his daughter's wedding, so he reluctantly agreed to participate. When I murmured that it would have been nice if you had told me if we were attending the same wedding, he scratched his head with a reluctant look and said, "I didn't think there was any need to say it anyway. That guy probably just wanted to somehow establish a connection with me." However, even though it was by chance, the fact that he helped me remains unchanged. So I lowered my head and said, "Thank you." Then the foreman said with a wry smile, "I've always tried not to treat people differently just because they're women." But when he said something like that, then my older brother arrived and lowered his head too. The foreman saying, "Thank you for responding to the sudden act." The foreman said, "She's my top disciple, so being silent when someone goes that far is just unreasonable." Patting my head, I vaguely remembered the past as I felt the size and warmth of his hand. I was captivated by the work of a carpenter when I was in elementary school. During that time, whenever I had unpleasant experiences at home or school and needed to calm my feelings, I used to visit an old church. It was during one of those visits that I happened to come across the foremen who were repairing that church, and that's how it all began. I was watching their work in a place where I wouldn't be in the way, and I was completely captivated by their beautiful craftsmanship. From then on, I started researching the history of old buildings like churches, and I went to see them in person. As I grew up, I also sought out books about carpentry techniques and devoured them. I was completely enthralled by it all, and when I became a middle school student, I made a certain decision and decided to have a conversation with my parents about it. The decision was that once I graduated from middle school, I would become an apprentice to a master carpenter specializing in old-style construction and learn the craft to become a top-notch carpenter myself. However, naturally, my father strongly objected. He said it would be difficult for a woman and that there are more suitable places for a woman to work. He shook his head and refused to agree, but I just couldn't give up, and I continued to persuade my parents day after day. One day, seeing me in that state, my mother came into my room and spoke to me, who had been defeated by my father's arguments. Lying face down on my bed, sitting at the edge of the bed, my mother gently stroked my head and said, "I understand that becoming a carpenter is a challenging path, and I think I'm saying this because you know it. I won't oppose it, but you'll have to show your determination to your father." After thinking it over for a while, I felt that this was the only path for me. So I visited the construction company and lowered my head to the foreman, who had already been recognized as a living national treasure at that time, and asked him to take me as his apprentice. At first I was turned away from a place where women weren't traditionally allowed to enter. However, I kept going for several months, and even if I couldn't get inside the shop, I continued to wait for the foreman to come out and kept bowing my head. And then, during the winter of my second year in middle school, after numerous attempts at pleading, the foreman finally burst into laughter. He walked towards me, surprising me, and said, "I'm going to visit your parents right now." On the day when the foreman actually came to our house, my parents were bewildered, but the foreman bowed deeply in front of them. "This young woman will surely become a top-notch carpenter someday. I can see a burning passion and rods. Please believe in me and entrust your daughter to me." Saying so, the foreman looked at me with a kind gaze and gently placed his hand on my head, even though my father still seemed reluctant. My mother, with tears welling up in her eyes, said, "Please take care of her seeing this." My father also lowered his head towards the foreman, holding back tears, and my older brother, who had witnessed many arguments between me and my father, looked at us with an indescribable expression, a memory that I still vividly recall to this day. However, while I was determined to take the first step towards my dream, the days that followed were by no means filled with only enjoyable moments. After graduating from middle school, and with my parents' permission, I moved into the apartment provided by the construction company and began learning the job. However, at first I was often assigned to site cleanup, which was extremely physically demanding, and I struggled to keep up with my senior colleagues. Every time the work was delayed because of me, there were many instances where my senior colleagues got angry with me, saying things like, "This is what happens with women," or "Don't come here with half-hearted determination." Nevertheless, I didn't let it discourage me. I continued to watch and learn from the foreman and my senior colleagues' techniques, occasionally receiving guidance from the foreman himself. Before I knew it, I had grown to the point where I was entrusted with tasks alongside my senior colleagues. My senior colleagues began to acknowledge my skills more and started to smile and interact with me more. Finally, I'm starting to find enjoyment in my work now. I had thought that it would take much longer to earn the foreman's recognition, but just a while ago he clearly stated that I am his top disciple. I was so happy and grinning, but then he reminded me not to get too carried away, saying there's still a lot to learn. It felt like the usual foreman had returned, and I couldn't help but straighten my posture. Watching the exchange between me and the foreman, my older brother chuckled and looked at me straight in the eye. "Emma, there's something I've wanted to say for a long time. Seeing you face your dream of becoming a carpenter head-on and working hard to make it a reality, well, it made me realize that I could do more. It inspired me to strive for the highest I could reach in my own studies, which led me to become a doctor and help many people. I believe that if I hadn't witnessed your determination that day, I would have lived a much less fulfilling life. So thank you, truly." As he said this, I tightly squeezed my brother's outstretched hand while trying to hold back tears, and it felt like a warm sensation was flowing into my heart. And both our parents and the foreman were watching us, brother and sister, with kind eyes. In the end, after that incident with Kenny and the fear of upsetting the living National Treasure foreman, Kenny experienced his first setback. Having never faced failure before having graduated from a prestigious university, he struggled to bounce back from it, and eventually he decided to step down from his position as chairman of an educational institution, passing it on to his successor. Amy shared this with me when she came to apologize to me again. She was apparently fed up with her father, who was obsessed with academic achievements, and her mother, who accommodated that mindset. So when I saw Amy laugh confidently and declare that she was cutting ties with them, I couldn't help but exchange a knowing smile with my brother, both of us chuckling. I continued to learn the craftsmanship of a carpenter under the foreman while working harmoniously with my senior colleagues. However, in reality, I have taken on another job. It's a job that the school formally requested after receiving requests from students who had previously taken special lectures. I teach carpentry techniques at a construction-focused vocational school twice a week. Both jobs are fulfilling, and I'm currently leading a very satisfying life. One day when I reported about my work at the vocational school, the foreman suddenly burst into laughter with a joyful expression on his face. "If I hadn't met you, I probably wouldn't have allowed women on the construction site even now, and I never even thought about passing on my skills to people with such different aspirations like this. You're the one who changed me." Watching the foreman laugh like that, I couldn't help but smile, and I felt a warmth spreading through my heart. I thought to myself that it was a good decision to work here.